events, as we all know in this game, and to speak to an audience of people who are kind of actively in the game of changing life events, and I think that's kind of what we're all into. Sometimes things go to plan, sometimes things don't go to plan, and this is a story, I guess, about things when they don't go to plan and an approach to dealing with them and the aftermath. The plan, according to my teachers, went wrong when I started doing Latin. Fortunately, I discovered that school isn't always about Latin, and discovered that the outdoors existed, which I think probably like everyone in this room, had I not discovered the outdoors existed, I'm not sure quite what would have happened. But we've all got someone to thank, and the teacher with the crazy moustache at the end, who I met fairly recently, where he led us on this trip from one side of Scotland to the other. None of us knew anything about it. He told the school he had a summer ML and didn't. And it was in the days when teachers could get away with that sort of stuff, and we got away with it. So things progressed. I went to university. I was lucky enough to head to Swansea University, and again my sort of was sent to Swansea with kind of the resounding information from my teachers of, you're blatantly not interested in doing a degree. They saw through it, and all you want to do is go paddling and climbing, which was pretty close to the fact, in fact. So headed a sort of careering deterioration down into basically anything that was wet, hard, or generally not all that comfortable, and luckily got a degree in geology, but I haven't really done much with it since, other than look at lots of rocks quite close up. So my fascination for the outdoors was kind of kindled through what I wanted to do as a youngster, and I headed from a slightly alarmingly early age towards the military, and realised that the only way that I could find an obvious way of being paid to get in the outdoors was by joining the military or being a teacher, and I've already explained my interest in academic stuff, so it went the military route one, and I joined the Royal Marines. Pretty much direct from university. While I was there, I was lucky enough to get involved in a couple of projects to put some new routes up in some mountains in Central America, where we didn't really have permission to be, but I was lucky enough to fall in with a group of slightly maverick individuals who weren't that interested in climbing permits and permissions, and we just went and climbed anyway, and that is probably another story. So I joined the Royal Marines, and actually had wanted to join the Royal Marines since I was 12. My grandmother still regrets taking me to the Marines Museum in Eastleigh, and the story goes that they were trying to close at 4:30 in the afternoon, and at kind of 5 o'clock I was still listening to Paddy Ashdown's story about SBS selection, and eventually they gave us a free ticket to go back over the rest of the days of the half-term holiday so I could finish the rest of the displays. The mantras, what's on the screen there is that, for those of you who are not aware, per mare per terram is the motto, is the Royal Marines motto, by sea, by land. And the four statements underneath it are what's referred to as the Commando qualities, and they are courage, determination, unselfishness, and this peculiar one, cheerfulness under adversity. The story goes that when Churchill kind of raised the commandos in World War II, he came up with the sound words that commandos would need courage and determination and unselfishness. He left the room and walked back in almost as an afterthought, went, and probably cheerfulness in adversity, and surely adversity is what we kind of all revel in. So I went through Royal Marines training, and kind of, I know there's another Royal Marine mother in the room who's come and spoke to me already, and she will have seen a photo of her son in this state. And it's a peculiar passage. It's a bit like the races that you guys are all addicted to. There comes a point at which you understand more about who you are by destroying who you actually are and finding out what's underneath it. And for some people, it ruins them, and for other people, it builds them. And this room is obviously full of people who get built by it, and so that's the way it is, really. I was lucky enough to get the green beret, and I guess it's one of those few things in life that once you've got it, no one can take it away. I had a kind of cracking few years, basically taking no responsibility for anything in the real world apart from being a Royal Marines officer. And in May 2001 was invited to join a team of 6 other Marines to go and climb a route in Alaska on a mountain called Mount Hunter, which is next to Mount McKinley. It's not as well known as Mount McKinley. It's a pretty iconic mountain in the region, and at the time the Northeast Ridge hadn't ever been climbed. And the story, we spoke to a bunch of US Marine Corps guys who were also interested in climbing the route, and we knew them through climbing. And we had an amusing sort of discussion. They sort of said, it can't be climbed. We said, yeah, it can be climbed. They said, no, it can't be climbed, and as it turns out, they were right. Because 48 hours into the route, I was leading a section of ice which was getting steeper. We were climbing as 3 pairs, and as I moved from kind of 45-degree ground to a section of about 50-degree ground, we were loaded up, we were carrying kit up to the first camp, and a piece of ice, which in hindsight I've kind of replayed the moment a zillion times, as we do when these things happen. A piece of ice about the size of a head, I sort of looked at and thought, oh, I'll step up on that. And as I stepped up on it, I thought, no, don't feel great. And it sheared off, just as I was fully committed, just as I was standing effectively on one foot with a heavy rucksack on. And the next kind of minute and a half kind of changed my world forever, as I tumbled backwards, back down the mountain, about 1,000 feet past the 4 other blokes, who one of them was bright enough to say at the time, no rush getting them. And so the accident happened. I was with, I was roped to another guy who, and he and I both hit the bottom. Somehow in the actual accident itself, he managed to, probably a couple of people who played with some mountains in the room, but he managed to kind of arrest the fall, but the dynamics of the accident was such that the rope between us ripped him out of the mountain as well, and we both basically flew through the air together. And the actual accident, my sort of fall was here at those rocks, and we fell straight down here, bouncing off most of these things, and ended up in a snotty heap at the bottom. Comparatively, I was reasonably lucky. I ended up with a foot that's not supposed to look like that. That's my knee. My foot should be up there somewhere. My boots got ripped off, which is a bit alarming, because they were kind of like ski boots. They were stiff plastic mountaineering boots. My helmet got smashed and did unpleasant things to my face, not that would necessarily make a great difference. And I had a rucksack on which hit one of these rock spikes and was ripped open. The downside of that, other than it probably saved my back, was that all my kit was strewn down the mountain. So when I hit the bottom and was compos mentis enough eventually to sort of start thinking about sleeping bags and getting sorted out, I looked up to discover that my down jacket was fluttering on one of these rock spikes up here, laughing at me, and all I had in my rucksack was a packet of Rolos, which got eaten pretty quickly, and I didn't save the last one. So my mate was really, really badly hurt, and actually the story really should be about him, because he had what's called an open book fracture of the pelvis. It was actually only his climbing harness that was holding his pelvis together. He'd broken both his legs below the knee, and actually was in a really miserable state. So the good bit of the story was that we were 270 miles from anywhere. We were the 2 medics on the team, and both of us had the 2 radios in the team, and it all got smashed and none of it worked. So at the point at which the cards were dealt, they were all jokers. To cut a very long story short, I was with a remarkable bunch of people. We had all gone through a kind of remarkable process, and we'd all come from a similar background. A couple of guys skied off the 200k back to where we'd started, and a journey that had taken us several days through a really, really dodgy glacier system they nailed in about 48 hours in the dark without any support. So they, again, are the sort of unsung heroes of it all. And as they set off, a pilot who had dropped us on the glacier a few days before deviated from his agreed flight plan with some other mountaineers that were being pulled off from McKinley, and he decided he just said in a conversation, the story goes, hey, there's some crazy Brits on Mount Hunter, should we go and see how they're getting on? And they flew up the different glacier that we were on and came low enough to see that one of the lads with great glee had cut our brand new ropes up that we'd hardly even used and wrote SOS in the snow, and it was actually the SOS in the snow in ropes that the pilot saw and initiated what became a rescue. And remarkably, while our 2 companions were busy skiing themselves to almost certain doom to try and raise the alarm, we were already being mended in an Alaska hospital. So yeah, there you go. The net result was a photo that, again, no mother wishes to see. And I got pretty badly smashed up. My mate was similarly badly smashed up. And at the time, I had, I had great plans with my military career. I was going to go and give hard things a call. Things weren't hard enough. I was going to go and do harder stuff. And I remember telling doctors how much, all the other things I was going to do when my legs mended. And I remember at the time, the Alaskan surgeon saying to me, you might not manage some of those things, which was, at the time was something I wasn't listening to, but basically I fractured dislocated both my ankles. And my right ankle was a real mess. An awful lot of surgery. I'm sure there's plenty of people in this room who've found themselves the wrong end of a surgeon's knife or the wrong end of a turned ankle. Disappointingly, it's a bad time to discover how complicated the ankles are, and clearly you guys in here, everyone here, pretty reliant on all your joints, and so that extra pair of trainers that you don't bother changing and all the extra training that you may or may not want to do, it's worth it, because the ankles are pretty complicated beasts, as it turns out. And if you break this bone here, which is called the talus, and I managed to twist them in half, then often they don't mend. And so I was faced with a slightly challenging dilemma of getting married, which was kind of the plan. I'd proposed to my missus just before you go on an expedition, because that's what you do, don't you, when you're kind of signing yourself up to be one of these sorts of people. You go off on your big lifetime first ascent and you ask your wife, or girlfriend, to marry her. Anyway, and so for my wedding photos, I'm the one sitting down, which is a nice touch, isn't it? So, and I wasn't drinking on my wedding either, because that didn't agree with the medication I had to be on. But there we are. So I was faced with a pretty difficult dilemma, because I wanted to return to the Marines. Actually, I wanted to get on with my job and get back to kind of operational duty. I wanted to get back to mountaineering and paddling and sailing and the things that kind of made me me. And I got to the point where it was pretty obvious I was going to have to make a decision as to what was more important, going back to being a Marine or trying to maintain the lifestyle that I wanted and maintain the adventure. I was faced surgically with the choice of having my ankle fused and kind of cemented together, big screws through it and bits of scaffolding around my leg, and months of misery. And there might be a few surgeons in here, so I'll shut up with my amateur descriptions of their excellent work. And or an alternative which probably seems completely outrageous, but to me, I got to know a few amputees who were doing some pretty hardcore stuff at the time. A couple of guys were Paralympian sprinters and various other things. And I was at Headley Court. I was lucky enough, Headley Court, everyone will have heard of Headley Court. And I was on a course doing lower leg rehab, and there was a guy on the same course who was an above-knee amputee who was able to balance on his prosthetic on a medicine ball, which was something I was just in too much pain to be able to do. And I had chatted to him and chatted to a few others. Anyway, I left this place going, well, I think actually I'll be more functional as an amputee. So I spent quite a lot of time persuading the surgeons that that was a sensible course of action for a young bloke to choose to become an amputee in order to remain more active, and eventually kind of won my argument. Now, how you deal with that is kind of a bit of a personal thing. It's a choice that probably most of us would hope we never have to make. I had a bit of a plan to get a ridiculous tattoo done on this leg that had let me down. I intended to have it spelt wrong and it smudged and all those kind of things, and then just chop it off. And the surgeon persuaded me that it wasn't the brightest way of dealing with it and I might want to see a psychologist. So we opted for icing instead. And I basically held a wake for my foot. It was kind of my thing, really. I was saying goodbye to it. It had kind of let me down, so I was going to dispense with it. And it was just... It sounds a bit ridiculous now, and it perhaps sounds like I'm kind of making light of what is an impossible decision, but it was my way of dealing with it. And then looking back on it, actually, it worked for me. I'm not suggesting it would work for anyone else, and I've certainly never advocated it. And then a pretty sombre occasion occurred, which was kind of going through with it, really. And that's a photo of the following morning where all the kind of joking becomes a reality. And that happened just before Christmas in 2003. And all my mates were actually having a Christmas ball that evening in the unit that I should have been part of. And the following morning, in a particularly shabby state, about 10 of them trooped into this room. And unbeknown to me, there'd been a kind of random Caribbean theme to this party. And they all came in with stuffed parrots, which I thought was quite funny. The nurses weren't sure if it was funny, and my missus was definitely not sure if it was funny at the time. So I then end up with this room festooned with parrots, and one of these parrots has followed me ever since. Then begins this rehab journey, which is kind of, heaven forbid any of us find ourselves in a position where we're injured, but rehab is one of those things that will always hit people who are fully psyched and motivated the hardest. And funny old thing, it's the fully psyched and motivated people who quite often get smashed up quite badly because they're doing hard things. And so there's a sort of vicious cycle that occurs to do with recovery, because the more up and psyched you are, the more frustrated you become about being unable to do the things that make you you. And I'm speaking about this now with the huge benefit of hindsight, having been a very, very angry, grumpy, injured person. I certainly didn't manage my recovery in a way that I now advocate other people manage their recoveries, and kind of learned lessons the hard way, pushed myself too hard, too fast, ended up with skin breaking down, ended up damaging stumps, ending up breaking things, getting quite cross. And remarkably, I'm still married to the lady that you saw in the first photo. So it's been a hard journey, and it's a hard journey not just for you, it's a hard journey for the people that support you. And so if you get injured, be mindful of the fact that it's not supposed to be easy. Body takes a while to mend, let it take as long as it does. I was very lucky to have the benefit of some pretty expert rehabilitation specialists in the Marines, and actually with recent events, you'll all be aware that the rehabilitation in the military is actually probably the world standard in many regards, for very good reason. I then ended up in a situation where the Navy have a kind of medical process whereby if you're downgraded or you're not capable of doing your job at an operational level, you go through various stages of kind of, it's a slippery slope basically, as you slowly get less and less fit, and they get less and less interested in employing you, which is understandable. And I went along to the first kind of meeting of this and had effectively a sketch which is something out of the Fast Show. It can only be described as that, where I sat across a huge oak table with a sort of surgeon admiral opposite me with enormous amounts of gold braid on, sort of harumphing over his kind of half-moon glasses. And if this is someone's granddad, I'm really sorry. But he sort of said, you know, so what do you expect? What do you expect out of your recovery? And I rather childishly said, well, I'm going to do my Commando tests again to prove that I can crack on and be a bootneck. And he sort of took his glasses off and looked at his learned advisors left and right and went, do you think that's feasible, Captain Bonney? At which point I was quite annoyed with him, and I went, yeah, I do actually, yeah, I think it is. And he went, very good, see you in a year. And I left, at which point everyone in the room was sort of not quite sure what to do. So I'd done the thing that, again, everyone in this room would have done when they kind of drunkenly said to their mates, yeah, I'm going to go and do that ultramarathon next year. And the following morning they go, how's the year training for the ultramarathon? You're like, yeah, it's cracking, see you in a year. So I had to kind of, as the phrase goes, step up to the plate. And so by kind of accident really, I then, and by having some supporters, I went through the Commando tests again as an amputee and did them. The son got hold of it and very kindly and generously awarded me the nickname Captain Courage, which has never ever left me. But they're good like that, aren't they? It was quite amusing when I heard the other day that there's a whole load of the Sun reporters have been arrested, hadn't they? And the guy who'd done that and wrote that story was one of them, so every dog has its day. And I then went back to the medical board, having passed these Commando tests, and the same admiral then kind of stuttered his way through the kind of review board and sort of went, well, I can't really discharge you because you can do everything you need to be able to do to stay in, so you might as well stay in. At which point I was kind of cutting new ground, which was really quite exciting. But in hindsight, it's not necessarily been the most useful of precedents to have set, because I know my circumstances were hugely different from many of the guys who are currently injured and trying to work out whether they're staying or going or what they're doing. So I was lucky to have been in a position to make those choices and ultimately make the choice about whether I was in the circumstances or not in the first place. I went back to Norway. There was a few things I needed to do. I needed to go back to Norway and prove that I could still ski. I couldn't ski before I was an amputee, so to be able to ski as an amputee was quite edifying. In fact, I was better without my leg than with it. This became quite amusing because there was all sorts of comedy ideas. There was lots of people winding me up saying there was going to be divers in the water that were going to take my leg off me and all this kind of stuff. The humour is something that gets you through these circumstances, and the camaraderie that is in this room and in groups of people like this is what actually will get you through the difficult times, no question. It's the dark humour, and injury seems to bring the dark humour out of us all. So I then kind of went on a bit of a crusade, I suppose, of kind of going back to the activities that I had previously done, and I kind of systematically and rather single-mindedly went through each one and returned to the point where I had been before I was injured. And whilst my only reference to mountain biking will be this photo, and in the current company I won't make any comments about my prowess on a mountain bike because it's nonsense. But But to get back on a bike was important, and to get back on a bike, and I now work a lot with amputees, and it's an important bit of, it's an important thing to get that feeling of speed and freedom is an important part of the process. Mountaineering was something that was an absolute passion of mine, and of course it was the reason for me being in this ludicrous situation in the first place. So to want to go back to mountaineering, I suppose the phrase goes, you should get back on the horse, but that, you know, it's a difficult choice to make. For me it wasn't, I had to get back to mountaineering, it was just something that's in it. And so I went and did some training, and we picked up a series of challenges, and over time, this is a Cullen Ridge actually, so we went and nailed the Cullen Ridge, me and a climbing partner, and I have got a helmet somewhere. For some reason I obviously took it off for that photo, but I normally climb with that one. But this was a turning point, because at this point I don't think an amputee had ever done the Cullen Ridge. I don't think an amputee here was climbing at that sort of level, and I met up with a guy called Jamie Andrews, who some people may have heard of, who's a quadrilateral amputee, lost his hands and feet to frostbite in a horrific accident a few years ago. And he and I met up and did some bits and bobs, and we had this amusing situation where he was belaying me with no hands, and I was climbing with only one foot. And some very sage, wise mountaineer walked past us and went, "Actually waiting to happen, that." Now running was something, you know, most Marines are quite into their running. Most of us are pretty reluctant runners, not very good runners, it's just a rite of passage, you just got to be able to do it. And running, though, was something I wanted to get back to as an amputee. I entered a couple of races, nothing on the scale of this, and when I was kindly invited to enter the race today, I politely declined, not wishing to embarrass myself anymore. But running was something that was a big thing, and I did spend quite a lot of time running. I had some legs adapted so I could run. I ran in boots. I got back to, I did my Commando tests again, and most of them are done at some pace, it's fair to say. Running is a funny thing though, isn't it? Because it's a pretty destructive need. It actually wrote off the remaining ankle that I've got, which is pretty disappointing. So I'm now in a situation where I don't run, and I remember having kind of a fourth or fifth arthroscopy on my left ankle, and the surgeon waited around until I'd come out of recovery and all that sort of stuff. And he was sitting on the end of my bed, a bit kind of alarmingly. "What are you doing in all your scrubs?" He said, "I'm staying here," he said, "an hour after I should be going home." Yeah, I'm listening. "Because I want you to get the message directly from me not to do any more running at all, ever. No running, stop running." And it appears that running with one leg is quite destructive on the remaining one. However, it's a drug, isn't it? It's a drug. There's something about it. There's something about the buzz. There's something about the fact it's quite hard work. And so I used a slightly more technological prosthetic to give me a little bit more compensation on the other leg, and put an extra inner sole in my left foot, and got a few more years out of the legs. And I got training for an event that some of you will be aware of, the Devices to Westminster Canoe Race, which was able to combine a couple of passions. One is hurting yourself, which again is something that we've all been talking about this evening, and the other is paddling. And I think actually Devices to Westminster is one of those events that is a bit of a leveller actually. It's you certainly have to have a few, what did you describe them as? You have to have a few quiet words with yourself on those dark, the 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock stints. Someone asked that question earlier, that's brilliant. Yeah, somewhere in Richmond when I was paddling into the bank, hallucinating about glowing lollipops on the other side of the river. So, but these things are an important part of the psyche and an important part of recovery. And once you've done one thing that you need to tick off, you then got another one. And as part of a recovery process, it's important to have those as incremental and understand how those goals can be levelled out so that they're achievable, because for people like us, not achieving your goals can be even more destructive than the benefit of achieving them. So it's a dangerous game. I was lucky enough to train as a landing craft specialist as an amputee, and actually was allowed to sort of crack on with my career. I spent a bit of time in Sierra Leone. I did some exciting things in the Congo when things were kicking off over there a few years ago. And so I was lucky enough to get involved, get amongst it. I was lucky enough to operate in the Arctic, in the desert, in the jungle as an amputee, which has given me a really unique insight into the management of kind of amputee needs in a kind of full-on adventurous environment, and which led me to kind of realise that it was those sorts of environments that I wanted to continue to work in as an amputee, and to kind of inspire other people who were going through a recovery process to push themselves to find the goals that they really wanted to achieve. Blam is a pretty iconic mountain in the Himalayan range, and I was involved 2 years ago in a project to take an almost exclusively injured group of servicemen to Everest Base Camp, and whilst we involved in taking them to Everest Base Camp, which ultimately ended up as a really successful trip, they all got there. Myself and another guy led a group to attempt Blam, which is this iconic mountain. It really is. If anyone's ever been to the Himalayan region or done the walk to Everest Base Camp, it sits there taunting you. It's a pretty technical mountain, but it is an iconic mountain. And for me, it was a similar grade mountain in terms of technical need as the mountain in Alaska had been. So for me, it was a sort of, I need to do this to see if I'm back where I was. It was the last thing I needed to sort of tick off, I guess. There's it is a proper mountain. This is Camp 2, and that is Camp 2, that's it. It's on a rock spire that's 4,000 metres down to the glacier down there. It's the longest toilet I've ever used. It's got space for 2 tents. There's usually about 10 teams trying to climb it, so there's a bit of argy-bargy to try and get your tent in the right place, and it's quite regular you come down from the top to find your tent no longer there and someone else has got the spot. And it's a full-on place. There is a view of it from... It's funny, it's an amazing place. You've got to go there to see it. It is one of the most iconic kind of camping spots in the world, I think, probably. And yeah, like I mentioned here, the toilet's here. So we had a team of, there was a team of 4 of us, there was a team of 3 of us that attempted it. It is a tough place to be. The conditions, we were very early in the season and sadly we didn't summit, which was a shame. We got about 300 metres from the summit and had the good grace to give it to the mountain that day and to decide to descend. And the descent involved about 36 abseils down a variety of very dodgy bits of 7mm cord that you're never quite sure what they were attached to. And the decision to come down was the right one given the circumstances. But it was good from my perspective. It meant that I had returns to the level. I'd done some high altitude, pretty hardcore mountaineering in crampons, in high altitude boots as an amputee. I had managed to lead in that environment and had the ability to work with others in that environment. And more importantly, probably for my wife and mother, I had the sense to turn around when things were not going to work out, and to spend the night on that hill would have caused significant problems. Not cold toes for me, but probably for other people who were there. So we kind of drew a line under it at that point. We returned, kind of not defeated, but pretty chuffed with what we'd achieved, really. It's still there. I won't go back, I don't suppose. It cost a lot of money, and you can do these things a few times. But I was able to sort of kind of go comfortable, say, right, okay, well, I'm back climbing at the level that I want to be climbing at, which is nice. There's a few other people important in the world, and the journey changes as you go on. I certainly had no interest in having any of these when I was at the beginning of the presentation. And I'm lucky enough to have 2 utter nutcase children who insisted on us building an igloo when it snowed last winter. And that's just a picture that has amused me and travelled around with me, so I thought I'd share it. But it's funny how your perspective changes, and injury actually has been a hugely positive thing. In fact, I wouldn't have chosen to go through the route that I've been through at all. Obviously, none of us would, but it actually has taught me and given me an insight into who I am and what makes me tick and what makes me work, which is quite a useful and unique opportunity. I got involved in setting up a project when I left the Marines called Adventure Rehab, which was exactly as it says on the tin. It was delivering rehabilitation to traumatically injured people, particularly to amputees, using the outdoors and using adventurous journeys and adventurous activities as a means to a rehab journey, as opposed to taking physiotherapy and doing it in a physio room. I managed to find a physio who wants to do his physio in the outdoors, and the rest of the team are similarly psyched. I've got to work with some remarkable people, almost exclusively civilians, a couple of military guys, people who wouldn't necessarily have had the opportunity to get in the outdoors and do outdoor things and feel the buzz that we kind of all live for, really. And that's been a pretty powerful and rewarding journey, and a journey I suspect that will go on. I'm still found wanting and struggling not to run. I haven't run, if I'm honest. I've discovered road biking, which is an altogether more perverse activity, and I'm still getting my head around it. Climbing is still a passion, and pushing the limits is certainly a passion. So that's me. Thanks for listening. I hope it's been of interest, and I'll take any questions.